Welcome to Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into a really big question, one that sits right at the intersection of history, power, and faith. What if? What if one of the biggest belief systems the world has ever known wasn't just, a spiritual thing, but was actually shaped, maybe even pushed, by an empire as a political tool?
It's a pretty provocative idea, isn't it? It makes you stop and think.
Totally. Was Christianity this genuine spiritual awakening that just swept through the ancient world? Or was it something else, maybe a tool, carefully crafted, maybe even manipulated by the Roman Empire?
Yeah, and that question forces us to look past the simple stories. It pushes us into that really complex, often messy space where belief systems and raw political power bump up against each other. They influence each other. They co-opt each other. Sometimes they even change each other fundamentally. It's never just one or the other.
Right. So for this deep dive, our source material is really interesting. It's from a debate, actually, called Christianity, Divine Faith or Roman Tool, AI debates. Historian versus Christian. So we're not just getting one angle, we're hearing this dynamic clash of ideas between two, frankly, brilliant minds.
Ah, that's great. So who are we hearing from?
Okay, so on one side, there's Dr. Marcus Ellison. He's a historian really deep into Roman imperial strategy, early Christian history. His whole perspective is kind of grounded in historical patterns, power dynamics, political motivations, that sort of thing.
Okay, the historian's viewpoint, looking for the earthly mechanics, maybe.
Exactly. And then opposing him, you've got Reverend Lydia Hale. She's a theologian, a Christian apologist, knows the early church doctrine inside out, especially the stories of faith and martyrdom, that resilience.
So she's coming at it from the faith perspective, the internal transformation, the power of belief itself.
Precisely. So our mission here, for you listening, is to pull out the key insights, the most important nuggets from this debate. Think of it as a shortcut to getting your head around this really complex question. We want to find those surprising facts, those moments that make you go, aha.
And exploring both sides is so crucial, isn't it? To really grasp something, this layered history, theology, politics, all mixed up, you have to engage with the different arguments.
Yeah.
We really want you to consider both Dr. Ellison's points and Reverend Hale's points seriously.
Yeah.
Look at their evidence, their reasoning. It's about building that richer, fuller picture, not just picking a side.
Okay then, let's dive in. Let's unpack this fascinating historical puzzle and see what these experts bring to the table. All right, so Dr. Ellison starts by painting a picture of Rome in the 4th century AD. And it's not the image of peak imperial power you might expect.
No, definitely not. He argues Rome was actually, pretty fractured, riddled with problems.
Yeah, he talks about constant political instability, major economic stress, and this incredibly diverse religious landscape. Lots of different pagan beliefs all over the place.
And his point is, this context is crucial. It makes Rome vulnerable, maybe even desperate for something unifying.
How so? What was the situation on the ground?
Well, imagine constant power struggles. Emperors rising and falling, civil wars. It's chaotic. Economically, things were rough, inflation, bad currency, poverty. The old Roman ways felt strained. And spiritually, you had the official Roman gods, sure, but for many that felt maybe a bit bureaucratic. Then you had countless local cults, mystery religions coming in from the east, like Mithras, Isis.
So lots of different beliefs, but nothing holding the whole empire together.
Exactly. They often competed. Loyalties were local, not empire-wide. So this mix of political mess, economic woes, and spiritual fragmentation, it meant Rome was searching for something, some kind of social glue, something to bind everyone together under one banner.
Okay, so Rome is looking for unity. And Ellison says this is when Christianity really takes off, right? He points to the Edict of Milan in 313 AD.
Right, the moment Constantine basically legalized Christianity, stopped the persecutions.
And what Ellison finds striking is how fast things changed after that. He says, within just a few decades, it goes from tolerated to basically the official religion under Theodosius III.
A massive shift in a relatively short time.
And Ellison's big claim here is this timing. It was no coincidence. He thinks Constantine saw an opportunity.
A strategic one. From Ellison's perspective, Constantine wasn't just having a moment of faith or being nice. He was being a shrewd politician. He saw Christianity as this ideal, unifying ideology.
Why Christianity specifically? What made it ideal?
Well, Ellison breaks it down. First, it was adaptable. Unlike pagan cults tied to specific places, its message was universal. Anyone could join. That's huge for a diverse empire.
Okay, makes sense.
Second, it was already hierarchical. The church had bishops, priests, a structure that kind of mirrored Rome's own administration. So there was already this network Constantine could potentially plug into for communication, for control.
Like a ready-made infrastructure.
Pretty much. And third, and maybe this is the kicker for an emperor dealing with instability, it promoted morality and obedience. Think about teachings like peace, humility, render unto Caesar. From an imperial view, that could sound like a population that's easier to govern.
A population focused on the afterlife, less likely to rebel.
Potentially, yeah. So Ellison's argument is that Constantine saw the utility of this religion, its structure, its message for consolidating his power and unifying the empire.
Wow.
It wasn't just about belief, it was about statecraft.
That idea that it was strategically useful is, well, it definitely challenges the usual narrative. But what about the centuries before Constantine? What about all the suffering?
And that's exactly where Reverend Hale jumps in. She pushes back hard on this.
Yeah, she brings up the nearly 300 years of intense persecution.
Yeah.
Christians being tortured, executed, scapegoated, thrown to lions.
It's a brutal history. And Hale asks this really powerful question. Why would a state tool begin as a threat to that state?
Right. If it was designed to serve Rome, why was Rome trying to wipe it out for so long?
Exactly. It flips the logic. Early Christians were often seen as disloyal precisely because they wouldn't worship the emperor, they wouldn't join the army sometimes. Their allegiance was to Christ, not Caesar. That was treasonous.
So their very existence was a challenge to Roman power.
Absolutely. Hale argues that their survival, even their growth, despite all that horrific persecution under emperors like Nero, Diocletian, it points to something incredibly powerful within the faith itself. A deep conviction, a real transformation. Not some political game. It suggests independence, not subservience.
And she emphasizes the message, right, that it was transformational, not political.
Yes. She highlights teachings like love your enemy, serve the poor, forgive endlessly. These values, she argues, weren't typical Roman imperial values. They were revolutionary.
Especially appealing to the marginalized. Slaves, women, the poor.
Precisely. People who found a dignity and community in Christianity that Roman society didn't offer them. So for Hale, Constantine didn't create this movement's success. He co-opted something that was already thriving, already powerful on its own terms, growing from the ground up for centuries.
So her conclusion is that Christianity was already a force before the empire decided to use it.
Definitely. It stood on its own long before any emperor gave it the nod.
Wow. Okay, so we have two really different ways of looking at the origins here. It feels like it comes down to interpreting motives, doesn't it? Not just the sequence of events.
Absolutely. Ellison sees imperial pragmatism, a smart political move. Hale sees an authentic spiritual fire that couldn't be contained. Same history, totally different reads on why it happened.
Okay, let's move into the next phase of the debate. Ellison clarifies his point. He's not saying Rome invented Christianity.
Right, but that it weaponized it. That's a key distinction for him.
And the prime example he uses is the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Constantine himself presided over this big theological meeting. How does Ellison see this as weaponization?
Well, Nicaea was called primarily to sort out the Arian controversy, right? This huge debate about whether Jesus was truly divine and equal to God the Father, or if he was created by God and therefore subordinate.
A major theological rift.
Huge. And Ellison argues Constantine's deep involvement wasn't primarily about saving souls or finding theological truth. It was about political stability. Think about it. If this rapidly growing, influential religion was tearing itself apart over doctrine, that division could spill over and destabilize the empire itself. Bad for business, basically.
So theological unity equals political unity.
That's Ellison's interpretation. By calling the council, steering the debate, maybe even pressuring bishops to agree on a unified stance, the Nicene Creed Constantine was ensuring the church would be a unified, predictable force for the empire, not a source of internal conflict.
So the creed itself becomes more than just a statement of faith.
Ellison calls it an imperial decree. He argues it transformed faith into state ideology. It fits his model of Roman strategy: centralize canonized control, centralize authority, establish an official doctrine, canon, and control the religious landscape. Domesticate the faith, essentially.
Turning a potentially wild spiritual movement into a managed state asset.
That's the argument.
But Reverend Hale pushes back again. She warns us not to confuse political influence with divine truth. What's her take on Nicaea and this idea of control?
She points back to the history before Nicaea. Christians consistently resisted blending their faith with Roman paganism syncretism. They suffered for not worshiping the emperor. This, she says, proves their independence long before Constantine showed up.
They already had clear boundaries.
Right. And she argues Christianity's core tenets were actually anti-Roman in many ways, rejecting polytheism, their general pacifism clashing with Roman militarism, their focus on equality, challenging the strict social hierarchy. This suggests inherent resistance, not easy cooperation.
So what about the council itself? Does she deny Constantine was influential?
No, she acknowledges his presence and influence, but she emphasizes that the bishops there debated fiercely. It wasn't a rubber stamp situation. There were real passionate arguments about core theological issues, even with the emperor watching.
So Constantine might have wanted unity, but he didn't just dictate the theology.
Hale suggests he more tolerated their theological process rather than tightly controlling it. And the creed that emerged, she argues, endured for centuries, not because Constantine ordered it, but because it genuinely reflected the early church's authentic beliefs that had been developing for a long time.
And she had that interesting point about the double-edged sword.
Yeah, that if Rome was using Christianity as a tool, it was a risky one. Because emperors die, empires fall, but Christ's message endured. The faith outlasted its supposed imperial master.
It raises that big question. Can power ever truly control an idea like that? Or does the idea eventually shape the power?
Exactly. A fundamental tension.
Okay, this is where it gets really intense, I think. The conversation shifts to the ethical side, the emotional impact. Ellison raises the uncomfortable question of the cost of Christianity's rise.
Yeah, he doesn't pull any punches here. He points out that once Christianity got state backing, the tables turned dramatically.
The persecuted became the persecutors.
In many instances, yes. He talks about pagan temples being destroyed, like the Serapeum in Alexandria, a famous example, non-Christians facing persecution, pagan practices being outlawed by imperial decree over time.
So the faith that suffered now wields the sword of the state.
And Ellison argues that this wasn't just, an unfortunate side effect. He claims it was guided by imperial policy, a deliberate redirection of power. He uses that striking phrase, Rome repurposed the martyr's cross into a symbol of conquest.
Wow. Taking the ultimate symbol of suffering and turning it into a banner for imperial power.
It's a powerful image. And he links this to the emotional core of Christianity, the hope, the forgiveness, the promise of eternal life. He suggests this deep emotional appeal was consciously harnessed by the state.
How so?
Through state-sponsored churches, grand ceremonies, promoting relics, all designed to capture hearts and minds, channeling that spiritual longing towards loyalty to the Christianized empire. He asks, isn't this the hallmark of a sophisticated ideological weapon, using deep human emotions for control?
A very cynical view of religious appeal, perhaps. But Reverend Hale obviously sees that emotional power completely differently.
Completely. For her, that deep emotional resonance isn't proof of manipulation, it's evidence of truth. It shows the message itself had genuine power.
She argues people chose it out of real conviction, right? Not because the emperor told them to.
Exactly. Often risking everything. She says, faith isn't coerced, not truly. You can force outward compliance, maybe, but not genuine inner belief.
And she emphasizes the positive social impact the ethical shift Christianity brought.
Yes, that's key for her. It offered dignity to the downtrodden. That core teaching, every person is made in God's image. Slave or noble, man or woman, she calls it morally seismic in the context of Roman society.
A radical idea back then.
Absolutely. Christian communities were known for charity, for caring for the sick, widows, orphans, creating a social safety net that didn't really exist otherwise. These actions, she argues, driven by genuine faith, were incredibly attractive and converted people organically.
But what about the later violence? The persecution of pagans, the Crusades? Does she just ignore that?
No, she addresses it directly. She acknowledges later Christians made terrible mistakes, that the church has blood on its hands. But, and this is crucial for her argument, she insists that the misuse of faith doesn't negate the purity of its origins.
So the later corruption is a human failing, a distortion, not inherent in the original message.
That's her stance. The abuse of power doesn't invalidate the initial spark of truth or the genuine transformation it offered.
It's that classic, difficult question about means and ends, and whether later actions can taint the beginning. So is faith this powerful, pure force or something easily bent and misused by power? It's still hanging in the air.
The central tension, for sure.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to the physical evidence, archaeology, science. Ellison brings up some points here to bolster his imperial tool argument.
Right, he talks about the material record, what we actually dig up from the ground.
He claims the spread of Christian symbols really takes off and aligns with Roman administrative centers after Constantine gives it the green light.
Yeah, he points to things like the Chi symbol suddenly appearing everywhere on coins, military banners, public buildings, grand churches, basilicas being built with state funds in important cities, the veneration of martyr relics becoming much more public and state-sponsored. It all signals imperial endorsement.
And he also mentioned the festivals, like Christmas and Easter.
Yes, the Christianization of pagan festivals. His argument is that Rome strategically co-opted popular existing pagan celebrations to make conversion easier. Saturnalia, the Roman winter solstice festival, gets repackaged as Christmas. Spring fertility rites get absorbed into Easter.
He sees this as deliberate, strategic repackaging, not just organic cultural blending.
Exactly, making the new faith feel familiar, less threatening. He even brings in a kind of scientific angle, arguing that mass ideological shifts are rarely accidental. They need infrastructure, ways to spread the message, incentives, all things the Roman Empire could provide: roads, communication networks, money, literacy for clergy.
So a top-down, well-managed campaign using existing Roman systems.
That's the picture Ellison paints.
But Hale has a different interpretation of this same evidence, doesn't she? She acknowledges the adaptation, but sees it differently.
She does. She sees Christianity as inherently dynamic, able to translate itself into new cultures to survive. It's part of its strength, its missionary impulse. So using familiar dates or symbols wasn't manipulation, in her view, but smart adaptation to help people understand the core message: redemption through Christ.
So adapting the packaging, but keeping the core message intact.
Right. And her really crucial counter-evidence comes from before Constantine. The archaeology that reveals things like underground churches, those house churches, the Domus Ecclesiae, and the catacombs.
The burial sites with hidden Christian symbols.
Exactly. Filled with symbols like the fish, the dove, the anchor. Symbols used by Christians when the religion was still illegal and persecuted. These sites prove that a vibrant Christian community existed and was creating its own culture before any imperial help.
So proof of grassroots existence, independent of the state.
That's her argument. For Hale, this early archaeology doesn't show control. It shows resilience. It shows the faith spreading organically despite opposition. So science doesn't undermine faith. It illuminates its resilience.
It's amazing how the same evidence, ruins, symbols, dates, can be interpreted in such opposite ways. Proof of control, or proof of adaptation and resilience.
It really highlights how much interpretation plays a role in understanding history. The evidence itself doesn't always speak clearly. We bring our frameworks to it.
Okay, let's get to the wrap-up, the enduring legacy. Ellison makes his final case. He acknowledges Christianity obviously lasted. It has staying power.
But he firmly attributes its institutional success, its structure, its dominance, largely to Rome stepping in.
And he has that really punchy line.
The message may be divine, but the machinery was Roman. That really sums up his whole argument.
When the state pays for churches, appoints bishops, outlaws rivals, Ellison asks, who holds the reins?
It's a critical question. He suggests that the Christianity we see today, its structures and practices, isn't just shaped by the Gospels. It's also deeply shaped by those historical power dynamics, the councils, the politics, the influence of empire.
He even goes further, suggesting this alliance had a darker side.
Yeah, looking behind the curtain. He argues that by backing Christianity, Rome effectively silenced a lot of other voices: dissenting cults, pagan philosophers, different ways of thinking. He links Christianity's rise to a narrowing of intellectual diversity, potentially contributing to the Dark Ages.
That's a controversial link.
It is. His conclusion is blunt. It wasn't an accident. It was effective empire building. And the masterstroke was that the ideology, the religion, actually outlived the empire that promoted it. It became the government in many ways, carrying Roman organizational DNA forward.
A powerful, maybe unsettling view of how institutions carry legacy. But Hale offers a very different final thought.
She brings it back to the personal, the internal. She argues that despite all the imperial trappings, the real faith, the faith of the early Christians, remains in quiet places, in homes, in hearts, in humble prayer.
The essence persists, regardless of the institution.
That's her core belief. Empires rise and twist what they touch, but the gospel outlasts empires. She challenges Ellison directly. You can't explain away 2 millennia of belief as imperial strategy. There has to be something more profound going on.
And her metaphor.
That Christianity may have worn Roman robes for a time, but its soul was never Rome's to claim. The external structures might have been influenced, but the inner spirit remained independent.
Her behind-the-curtain view focuses on the believers themselves.
Exactly. Ideas only survive if they resonate deeply with people. She credits the martyrs, the missionaries, the monks, the ordinary believers who lived out the faith, often counterculturally. They were moved by something eternal, she argues, not just following orders.
And she finishes with a powerful statement about transformation.
Yeah, that no state can fabricate transformation at the soul level. No government can manufacture hope or genuine compassion or forgiveness. Power might try to hijack faith, it might corrupt it, but it could never rewrite its essence.
It leaves us with that fundamental question again. Can an idea, once it captures hearts and minds, ever truly be controlled? Or does it take on a life of its own?
A life far beyond the intentions of emperors or states.
So who ultimately held the power? The empire with its structures and strategies, or the faith itself with its deep personal appeal and resilience? These two experts have given us so much to think about from such different, compelling perspectives.
It's clear the relationship was incredibly complex, not a simple cause and effect. History seems to show this constant, intricate dance between faith and power, influencing, co-opting, sometimes transforming each other in ways that are still debated today.
So you've heard the arguments, Dr. Ellison's case. Christianity is shaped, perhaps weaponized, as an imperial tool for unity and control by Rome.
And Reverend Hale's counter. A divine flame, an authentic spiritual movement whose core message and transformative power endured persecution and ultimately outlasted the empire that tried to co-opt it.
And maybe somewhere between the emperor's grand scepter and the simple carpenter's cross lies the complex truth we're still trying to understand. It leaves us with a big question to chew on. How much of what we believe, how much of the world we see today is shaped by genuine inspiration, and how much by those very human forces power, politics, control?
What really stood out to you from this deep dive? Did anything shift your perspective on history or faith or how power works in the world?
Definitely something to keep thinking about. We hope this has given you plenty of food for thought. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.